Who are these people?
I brought this story because like again there's this group of like science YouTubers that have been funded in part through members of society like Bill Gates, particularly Kurzgesagt is a famous one, right? And this is a video by Tom Scott, right? I think that's his name.
Depending on
this guy, people recognize this guy. Yeah, Tom Scott. But he's going to talk about this. German scientists are literally making a matrix for locusts, like as in the Matrix. Like, so we'll see how this works.
which science fiction you want to reference, the researchers here at the University of Constance in Germany have either built a holodeck from Star Trek, or the Matrix, or something kind of like the old alien abductions from the X-Files. It's just that they've built it for locusts.
One of the great challenges in studying collective behaviour is that there's this intricate network of interactions among the individuals that we can't see, we can't control. And so it's really difficult to understand how these locusts, with their local interactions, can scale up to swarms that can extend across hundreds of square kilometres. We thought, what if we could have individuals moving and interacting with virtual swarms? And so that's why we've designed this setup. What we do is we put the animal on this large motion compensating sphere. As the animal moves, the sphere always moves to keep it on top. And so it can move in a never-ending desert environment. And by tracking that movement, we know where the animal's gone. The locusts believe these virtual individuals to be other locusts. They will tend to align their direction of travel with near individuals. They will think of themselves as being within a real swarm.
Locusts don't have depth perception in the way that humans do. Prey animals generally have eyes on each side of their head, trading off 3D vision for a much wider field of view. So there's no need for sci-fi holographic systems or tiny little 3D glasses here. As long as they keep an exact track on the locust's eye position and update the screen fast enough, it seems to fool them. I'll be honest, I do find this a little bit unsettling, and it's only going to get more unsettling from here.
Ultimately, decision-making is made in the brain of the animal. So if we're to understand these vast swarms, we actually need to go in and look at how the brain processes this information. Yeah. So in this VR, we're basically plugging into the spinal cord. The animal here is tethered. It has to be held in place, but it can still walk freely on a ball that's elevated by air, so it doesn't have friction, allowing the locust again to move and interact with a virtual swarm. So we know what the animal's responding to, but now we can also decode the neural signals that are underlying the decisions it's making. So locusts impact the livelihood of 1 in 10 people on the planet through food shortage. They contribute to humanitarian crises across the globe. Yet, no one understood why they form swarms.
So the researchers here have also commissioned this massive imaging hangar and are going to track thousands of locusts individually by attaching tiny retroreflective tags to each one and using a motion capture system with more than 30 cameras. Sub-millimeter precision, 100 frames a second. Again, I had questions, starting with, where do you order thousands of locusts from?
Well, luckily for us, it turns out that entomophagy, or eating insects, is becoming an important aspect for humans and also for agriculture, for farm animals. So
eats the bugs. Collin eats the bugs.
I have.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Little fried cricket, delicious.
there are actually huge locust breeding centers. We collaborate with them, and so they bred the insects for us. We have a whole team of experienced individuals, from senior professors to undergraduate students, all working together, gluing these little tags on the individuals. And this allows us to see the three-dimensional information much more easily than we could using many video cameras. The imaging hangar is 15 by 15 by 8 meters. It's designed to mimic the environment in which locusts have evolved. We have extremely bright lights that capture the natural wavelengths of light that they experience. We have the correct temperature, around 27, 28 degrees centigrade, within this large space. So we're looking at the locusts in different densities to see which different structures and patterns form. But then we also want to understand how these voracious insects eat their way through crops, and also how they avoid predators when doing so. So we're also startling the individuals to see how social behavior also influences their response to predators. When the insects hatch, they're flightless. In fact, they're flightless for the first 2 months of their lives. It's only in the final adult stage that they take to the wing. And so the critical stage for understanding the swarms and also controlling them is these flightless juveniles.
And this is about 10,000 locusts. There are questions about testing on insects, of course, but the consensus right now is that they're insects, and as long as there's no unnecessary harm caused, the trade-off is well worth it. These would have been ground up for animal feed, after all, and the world doesn't have a problem with that. And locust swarms aren't cooperative. Researchers have discovered that locusts march in formation because travelling in the same direction at the same speed is the easiest way for each individual to avoid being eaten by other locusts. If humans can understand this swarm's behaviour, maybe we can start to understand the gigantic, devastating swarms with billions or even trillions of locusts, the ones that destroy food supplies. Or maybe we can start to improve the forecasting tools, because right now the only methods the world has to deal with devastating locust plagues are vast amounts of industrial pesticides and hope.
I find it astonishing that there are pest insects that impact so many people on the planet, and yet there's so little research into this. And one of the main reasons is that the people that really are impacted by locusts, they're subsistence farmers. They can't afford agrochemicals. You also have countries where they've got other problems to deal with, such as internal strife and conflicts. The last experiments we did with locusts when I was based in Oxford, we had, I think the most was 110 individuals. To approximate what they're doing in nature, we need to start looking at tens of thousands of individuals. The key here is that we need these very large-scale experiments to be that bridge between the lab and the wild. One of the amazing things about locusts is that the swarms just suddenly appear out of nowhere. And so what we're trying to mimic here is as population density increases, we think that these swarms...
Yeah. Like, terrible.
Yeah, I have thoughts, but I'll wait till the end to share.
Okay.
Because I thought initially, like, when you told me about this, I'm like, what kind of fever dream are you trying to have me watch? But,
Right.
but
will
I
suddenly
do think,
emerge.
yeah, I'll wait. I'll go. Keep going.
Yeah, we got a little bit more.
Suddenly start marching together in unison. We're just beginning to understand the wonders of collectives, how groups of neurons communicate with each other to allow animals to make decisions, and then how social interactions connect brains together, such as in locust swarms. So we think locusts can sense the environment through this communication within the swarm. This gives them a swarm intelligence that's beyond the brain of any individual. We can use this to begin to understand how and why these swarms form, and therefore how we can best minimize the impact on humans.
It's a couple of hours later. The imaging hangar has been blocked off from all humans for a little while, and the researchers here are now seeing marching behaviour that has never been observed in the lab before. It's only ever been in the wild. It's working, and they've come up with like a dozen ideas for new experiments in the last 10 minutes. This is brilliant.
So that was it. That's all of it.
Yeah. So, okay. So, as I said, I thought this was going to be a shit segment.
Yeah.
But I think immediately, and I think someone said you're trying to create the plague, you know,
Yeah.
but I do think in terms of climate change, and especially in the global south, like Africa and like I would assume Latin America too, like there probably locust swarms like that probably be happening there too as well. But definitely like Africa, where they're very much agricultural societies, like the research that they're doing to kind of think about locust behavior and how they can kind of help navigate that to prevent total destruction, you know, of crops that people need as far as food and like whatever agricultural infrastructure, I think is important. So in that context, it does make sense. And I think especially, I think the variable would be climate change and like change in like weather patterns and like, you know, like we don't, as they said, they don't know necessarily how locusts swarms start or why they start and like how they navigate, you know, where they will go in terms of like finding food or whatever, like whatever they do, you know. So in that sense, I could definitely see this more as a preventative measure in terms of potentially thinking in terms of like how to prevent like natural disasters and essentially like food shortages in areas of the world where they're more dependent on agriculture in that sense. So that kind of makes sense. That being said, a lot of that shit is also kind of like you must have been high to kind of think of all of that as well.
Yeah.
Like you're basically creating like a virtual helmet for a fucking locust.
Right.
Figure
Terrible.
out its movements or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of problems with that whole video. I mean, if there's like so much thrown into like one video, right? Where like one, they're trying to track the brain signals from a locust to figure out how it moves to possibly even replicate that movement, right? You know, I know we've talked about previously through things like Brett Wilkins did an article about it where AI swarms, right? Like literally talked about that. And this is just like as steampunk possible, your like the AI swarm is literally get like the most macabre, like Giger would be impressed, you know? Like this is slightly insect Kevorkian, you know? Like, but also they're like tracking of this because of food and agriculture, you know. But yeah, I'm sure the military funding on this is through the roof, so good for them. I'm sure Bill Gates and them are looking at this. You know, it's also how can we grow crickets without them swarming? Like it's that too, you know.
But also, how can we essentially keep them as a food source for us?
Yes, without them eating all of our food sources.
Right.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. You know, they had to like literally tap into the brain of a locust to see things. Like that's gonna go well. That feels like a horror movie waiting to happen.
Just don't understand. Like, I mean, there is some benefit to this, but at the same time, it's like the amount of money for this, and yet we don't have cancer cured. We don't have all these diseases cured. We don't even have like money for universal healthcare in this money. But you're able to spend this money on locusts, right? So, again, I kind of have a problem in terms of not to say that the science on this isn't valid. I'm sure it is. And I mentioned, you know, some things that how it could be valid, but to do this over, and not even that, actually just kind of taking care of our world just generally and just ensure that people have food, you know, at bare minimum. Like,
yeah, I mean, this is being funded outside the US, which I mean, it's a NATO country, Germany, like Charles Schwab all over that country. Like this is definitely, you know, I'm sure members of the what was that we covered earlier, the Center for Inclusive Capitalism or the Committee for Inclusive like I'm sure they're part of it. Rothschild's probably funding part of this. You know, I mean, it's standard scientific research, but like who asks for it? Why exactly are they doing it? Who's funding the research? Like none of that's really said, you know, which is partly why science YouTube is the way it is, you know. And I think for particular reasons, you know, there's videos on the internet, especially about like Kurzagat, a very particular YouTuber, was in bed with like the Gates Foundation essentially, right? You know, and it showed with their coverage of vaccines, with their coverage of a lot of things. So, you know, I think a lot of this is used to kind of manufacture some consent for things that people probably wouldn't consent to if they knew about it. But, you know, I also get the benefits of like not having locusts swarm and eat crops. So whatever, but And as it probably, you notice they were controlling the temperature and the sunlight. Yes. Why do you think they
Yes.
did that? Because it might affect the locust's ability to swarm. So things like global warming, global climate change, things like that. If their climate suddenly changes, is that a factor? That's why they're testing that.
Yes.
So
yeah, and that's what I immediately thought of when they were testing that in terms of the swarms, you know.
yes.
But it makes sense if Bill Gates' hand is on this. Obviously, he's trying to profit off of this. So obviously, any swarms would, at the end of the day, you know, minimize his profits. You know,
Yeah.
just based on the land that he's buying up, especially like in the global south.